Um, I'm joined here by my colleague Ruth, and we're going to talk to you this evening about encouraging students to use English in class. The chat is open, so let us know where it's from. And I think Ruth will be monitoring the chat and myself as well. So feel free to write any questions you have in there. Okay. Thanks for spending your Halloween with us, well, with me as well, Ruth, and participants. So let's get going. Okay. As always, you'll receive a certificate of participation and a webinar handout in the next few days. It might come out a little bit late since our office is closed tomorrow, but we should get out to you by Monday, I'm sure. It will contain all the information about this webinar. So all the information and a lot more, some worksheets and useful links you'll find in that. Okay. We all know that full immersion is, often thought of as the best way to maximize language acquisition. But if you're like me and a lot of teachers, you find it a bit hard sometimes to keep your students focused on English for the duration of the lesson. Okay. Do you find yourself slipping into, yourself slipping into your students' native language to explain difficult vocabulary or structures? I know I do, and I try to minimize it, but occasionally we find ourselves doing that by accident, or sometimes we need to. But it really can be hard to motivate these students to speak only English in their lessons, particularly when you're talking about monolingual classes. So if you're teaching just Italians or just Spanish students, obviously it gets a little bit easier if you have mixed nationalities, or if you don't know the language that your students their common language. Okay. Let us know in the chat if you have this problem. Let us know what you'd like to know, and hopefully we can tell you in this webinar. Okay. We're going to look at why students don't want to speak English and techniques to make your classroom more English friendly and therefore focused more on their English. As always, we have some objectives. So we want to get you to be better able to understand reasons why students may prefer not to use English in their English lessons. I mean, it's obvious that they, are shy about something they don't know totally, but there may be other motivations behind that too. Obviously, we want to motivate the students to switch into English and stay in English, okay? And we'll see if you're better able to use techniques that require students, things that they can't do in their other language. One key is motivating students. So what can we do to make our classrooms more conductive? Okay, we can use authentic materials. So, I mean, there's a time for a textbook, but why not use some songs, magazines, websites, the sort of materials that the students are more likely to come into contact with in English? Okay, why not let the students suggest or contribute to the topic? What is it that they want to speak about? Meet them on their own ground. Or do they want to talk about what they've been doing, what their interests are, what films they've watched, what songs they've listened to, TV series, things like that, websites, influencers? Okay. See if you can connect the topic that you have to teach, whether it is some grammatical point or vocabulary or a civics lesson. Can it relate to their lives? And I think really important is to cultivate this sort of climate of respect. Okay. When you speak another language, you're taking a risk. That is, maybe you're risking being misunderstood, or maybe someone can make fun of you. Okay. So when they're speaking in a different language, people that really try put themselves at risk by using new vocabulary, structures, grammar. They should be encouraged regardless of accuracy. And this is something that really can benefit students in the long run, because when they start doing things like exams, even an error, if it's an error, a small error made with a complex structure, that's not necessarily a bad thing. These examiners often take into account that the student is trying something. And obviously try to get the students to mix with other students. Okay, so we can rotate the students, don't always get them working with their desk mate, put them with new people so that they can use, practice things they've already said, get some more information, being exposed to different language, being put, maybe taken out of their comfort zone occasionally. And some things I find are quite useful is get the students to use English gap fillers. Things like let me see, let me think. Or when they can't think of what to say, they say, well, basically, or how can I say in English, instead of going back to these structures that they use in Italian. Okay? It can almost imitate a sense of fluency and therefore gives them confidence really when they need it. When they can't find the correct word, that's when they actually use something that can fill in for that, and that feeds back and makes them more confident. And always let them reflect on their performance. At the end of the lesson or during the lesson, you know, what did they think went well? Okay. What were their weak points? Okay. What could the teacher do? Okay, to help them. We've spoken about this in a couple of webinars about reflecting on your performance or your students' performance, letting them see, how can I say, take an outside look at their own performance so that they can you can get that feedback from them and you can help them in the future. Another key concept with this is what we call best practice. Okay. Best practice is a method or technique that's consistently shown superior results compared to other approaches. This is not just in English language teaching, but in many sectors, particularly in things like business. Okay. It's a benchmark or a standard of excellence widely accepted as the most effective or efficient way to achieve a desired outcome. Okay. In English language teaching, or well, in fact, in anywhere, modeling behavior is really important. Okay. In business, this means that, it's like the golden rule. Okay. We do what we expect from others. Okay. So if we want our clients to be courteous to us, we should be courteous to them. If we want clarity in communications from our clients, we should be clear in when we communicate with them. In TEFL, it basically means the golden rule. If you want to encourage English to be spoken in class, then you need to start with speaking English. Okay. And that means from the moment they walk in, greeting them in English, saying good afternoon, good morning to them in English, asking them how they are in English, giving them their homework in English at the end, saying goodbye. Okay. I'll hand over to my colleague Ruth, who's going to tell you a bit more about modeling behavior.
Hi, everybody. Basically, it's what Josh has just mentioned. How can we use English only in the classroom? That sometimes can be challenging. And sometimes it's just as simple as stating the basics. Okay, so even low-level learners can say, "Good morning, how are you? Fine, thanks." That sets a tone and it really helps to getting started. So let's ask students to greet each other in English. Another thing is grammar. Grammar should be explained in English. And if you want to compare it to your native language, that's fine. But try and make the comparison in English. Let's try and make it as simple as possible. And I think if we do that in English, we're actually simplifying it. We're just making it to their level. So we analyze a simple sentence and we just deal with the sentence in English. Definitions. I think in career development as teachers, we do learn a lot from finding the right definition for a word in English because it helps us develop as teachers and grade our language to the language our students understand. And then they just feel better because they can actually understand the word in English. So that boosts their confidence a lot.
Yeah, I think we're also got to remember that, like, when you give a definition of a word, you're not just helping them learn that word, but you're also giving them the associated words in the definition that will help them.
Exactly. And of course, lower levels, let's always remember this. For lower levels, we need to give them support. So, images, miming is very important. gestures, pointing, and those things help students understand and reinforce our definitions when it becomes tricky.
We have a lot of like visual learners, kinetic learners, things like that that'll always help. And it's just too
Exactly.
easy, and not as fun if you're going back to the native language, their first language.
So there is an ELT concept which is called tolerance of uncertainty. Have you heard of this? I mean, it's related to what we've just been talking about, giving definitions, and maybe does anybody know about this? Tell us in the chat.
Let us know in the chat. We'll go ahead anyway.
So basically, it's when you are able to, with the facts, to cope with the facts that you don't know things. Um, do you know how things will turn out? So, for example, you are willing to take a risk, you adapt to a new environment and a process, and you make decisions with confidence, okay? But because you tolerate the uncertainty. In ELT, this means that you may not understand every single word. You don't actually understand everything that's happening in the situation, but you can still cope. And this happens a lot when we're learning a new language. We understand pragmatic functions, we understand the context, we understand a few words, and then we kind of fill in the gaps in our heads, and we are able to continue talking, we are able to react, we are able to do what's required in the conversation. So this is very important. And this is why children are better learners, basically because they tolerate that they don't know a lot of things. So they feel at ease with not knowing what's happening and still operate in the world. They still interact. So adults find it a little bit harder. So it is something that we can actually exploit with children and teenagers. They don't need to know everything to be able to talk and interact, which is fantastic. And this also promotes, if we promote a safe environment, the students take those social risks, okay? They talk to peers, they make mistakes. Even if they don't understand everything, they actually understand the situation by taking the risk. So very, very important. Josh pointed this out earlier. We need to have a very strong focus and fluency. Okay. It is possible to speak a language fluently and not accurately. It is very possible. Even native speakers make mistakes and they still speak fluently. We all do. Okay. So let's compromise accuracy when we do these activities. We want them to talk. So we're not going to expect them to produce accurate language. We don't want them to have the perfect sentence, grammatically correct with the right word. What we want is for them to self-express. They're going to be expressing. And that's the important thing. They need to feel safe and encouraged to do this. And this is the only way, they're going to continue speaking in English because they feel they can. They are supported when doing it.
Yeah, and I think we got to remember that there's a time for accuracy, and there'll be a time for it at higher levels for correcting minor errors. But at lower or medium levels, it's quite easy to let students get by with making the occasional error in certain times, in certain activities, and give them that confidence, and that'll get them to the next level that where they can iron out those errors of pronunciation or grammar or vocabulary.
That means we're going to favor communication. We're going to favor the content of a form. I think sometimes we're very worried of providing that feedback, that support to help our students get better. But improving your English also means being able to have a conversation, even though there are errors. So, again, going back to what Josh pointed out earlier, at free judgment zone, students cannot feel that their speech is being evaluated for correctness at all times. They will become anxious. They will think they can only talk when they get it right. And they're not going to get it right unless they talk. So we need to provide that space and that environment for them to be able to express themselves.
Yeah, I think we all know students who freeze up during exams or things like that we know can speak, well, but they get into a stressful situation,
Exactly.
and that's where, at least in the classroom, we don't want that situation to be there.
And then we need to allow hesitation and thinking time. This is very important. We cannot expect them to interact fluently out of the blue, and then they can actually talk and they will be willing to do so. They need this training. And to do so, we need to respect that they might need time. They need to think about what they're going to say before they actually say it. So let's try and avoid awkward silences. It's okay if they take a bit of time before they speak, that's fine. We just need to learn to be a little bit patient. And then for low-level learners, I we always recommend to offer visual support. If why not give them a table, a grid to follow, or a series of picture cards that we hold to help the students to focus and remember the language that we're expecting them to practice. STEM sentences on the board, what Josh actually pointed out as well earlier. In my opinion, I believe those things that they might not be able to use, we give them that language, we show it to them, and we encourage them to keep looking at it, referring to it. And that will boost their confidence because they will have time and they will have something to say in English. And then again, the focus and fluency tasks. Let's keep them short. It depends on how good their English is. If it's really hard for them, they will need a lot of concentration. So half an hour for an activity will be a little bit too long. Whether short 10 minutes bursts are better. Let's allocate those 10 minutes. Let's do a task. Let's focus on fluency. And I can guarantee they will feel exhausted afterwards because they will have been working and concentrating on
It's like that fitness, high intensity training.
it. Heat, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then clear instructions. That's really important. We cannot rely on verbal instructions, not even on written instructions on the board, because sometimes, especially low level learners, they really don't know what's expected. And when we do a demo, we actually, okay, I wanted to talk about this. One of them will be asking, the other one will be answering. Instead of doing that, why not take a student and say, like this, how was your day? And then the other one replies, you exemplify it.
Yeah, this is something in our activities. I'm sure our participants will have noticed. We always try to indicate that on any tasks, activities we do, the demoing stage is always the best one to come up first.
Absolutely.
Can't expect something
Now,
from your students if you're not willing to do it yourself.
what we find out as well and especially, when students come from abroad and then we're teaching them, is that they're happy to talk in English to the teacher, but they may be reluctant to talk to their peers in English. And we do want to encourage this communication. We don't want students to talk to us in English. We want them to talk to each other in English. Why do we want this? Why is peer interaction so important? I'm going to rush through this a little bit, but basically, these learners are growing, and interacting with someone who's your age is always very communicative. You have something to talk about, you have something who understands where you're coming from, and then it becomes meaningful. And if learning and communication is meaningful and relevant, then it's memorable because we want to enhance that memory. And then, peer interaction is a laboratory for use of language. So they explore together, they correct each other, they self correct, they take risks, they communicate ideas, and they spot the language the other person is using for errors, which is great because then they can actually apply it to themselves and measure what they know. And they also discover a new language that they think, hey, that's a very good point. So when I'm going to speak to the next person, I'm going to use this structure. So that's how they learn from each other and correct each other. That's what I've just pretty much explained. And then again, self-correction, more opportunities for that. And it's not just guidance from the teacher. They're getting guidance from someone their age, and they feel confident that they can do that as well, which means they kind of go, hey, I know a little bit of English. I could see that error. I know a little bit of English. I could explain this. And I think that's quite important. Now, practice makes perfect. Let's remember this. So, if we speak to them and they speak to us in class, they don't get as many opportunities to speak English. And what we want to do is to promote that peer interaction. So, there's as much student talking time as possible. And they produce more language. And peer interactions are a massive source for us to diagnose their language, to see what we need to correct, to see what we need to provide. And then again, they are speaking, which is what we want.
Mm.
Now, pair and group work. Why pair and group work in English? Well, basically, the idea, for example, in task-based learning, which is what we do at MLA, because we think it just ticks in all the boxes of natural learning and authentic learning. So basically, they have to create something. There is a product. They learn English by completing a task. But the task is the least important thing. The task is kind of the achievement for them to feel good about it. But what happens when creating this task is what's important. Because that's when they are actually learning functional language. They're learning to take turns. They're learning what's happening in communication. They negotiate. And it maximizes peer learning because they're exposed to the English of their peers. And again, as said previously, they learn in forms, they correct, and it's a low risk environment. Students, they generally feel more reluctant to speak in public when they're teenagers, especially. It's a whole class thing, everybody's listening to them, and then there's a teacher who knows what good English is. They know how bad we're doing. So when they speak to each other, we're lowering that affective filter, and then, they can actually feel at ease, talk to each other, and then we take notes, and then we can correct. And again, student talking time, as I said earlier. Now, setting up parent group work. Do you want to do this one, Josh?
Sure. Okay.
We
So
do have, sorry, we do have webinars about parent group work, and we'll be running more. So if you want to dig into this, I recommend going to the playlist.
yeah, have a look on our YouTube page, MLA World, and you'll find our playlist of all our webinars, and we add these. Even this one will be there soon. Okay. So we had one on parent group work, and we went into this a bit deeper. But how can we encourage these students to speak English to each other, even when they're in pairs, and the student's not right next to them, might not even be able to listen to them. Okay. We have ICQs. Let us know in the chat if you know what that means. Okay. And CCQs, I'll wait for people to tell me what that means. Okay. But make sure they know they have to do it. Okay. So that and check that the reason they're working together. Okay. Make sure that there is an information gap. Okay. So this is really important that we don't just set two students and say, okay, talk about your holidays. Okay. Because they might do that the first time. They might even do it the second time you ask them. But the third time, they're just going to talk about something else and maybe, talk about it in Italian. Okay. But what we need to do is get one person to find out information from the other person that you have to say, okay, you need to find out where the person went on holiday, who they went with, and how long they spent there. What was the best thing? What was the worst thing about their holiday? Okay.
A
And
purpose for listening, right? And a purpose for talking.
and then they're going to have to feed that back to the class, not what they said, but what their partner said. It's going to be very clear that if that student didn't answer. Okay. And then we have students give students the functional language that they need. So as Ruth was saying before, put the language up on the board, on the whiteboard, on the interactive whiteboard. If you're using the internet, you could do it through the whiteboard there or in the chat. Okay. Get them to have that up there. You can even put gaps in there. I like ing. Okay. If they've got to do something simple, put up some expressions in there. Okay. Add it as the task is going. You can add more expressions up on the board. Okay. So you hear a good expression. Okay. Give the praise to the student who said it and put up on the board and encourage other students to use it. Okay. Don't interrupt the students when they made errors. Okay, so leave the correction until later. Okay, the teacher can hold back, doesn't want to get in there and discourage students. Okay, let them get on with the task, and then towards the end, or in a certain period in the lesson, or maybe even in the next lesson, you could go into some error correction and from what you noted. Make sure there's some this sort of what I was saying before, make sure there's some sort of verification of the task. So if you're doing task-based learning, okay, you can't just say, okay, make this task and oh look, we've run out of time. Okay, I hope you did a good job, and then go on, next lesson, start something new. You're going to have to tell them how it's going to be presented. Are they going to have to present it to all the class? Are they going to have to come up with some questions in pairs, and then you're going to put them in new pairs and ask them to other students? Hey, will they have to share? This is often sort of how stuff works in teamwork in offices or in corporations too. We have focus groups that work on one task and then share these with another task. Okay, without this purpose, the students won't be motivated to do it. Okay, maybe not even the first time, but certainly not in the future. Okay.
Maybe not even adults.
Okay.
Right.
Um, Ruth, do you want to tell us what the ICQs and CCQs are?
Okay, instruction check questions. So instead of repeating questions over and over again, isn't it better to say, okay, what are we doing first? Are we reading or are we speaking? Okay, and always instead of asking them to replicate exactly what the instructions are, which is quite difficult because getting instructions right is quite difficult, we basically give them options. Do you have to do these in pairs or do you have to do them individually? That sort of thing works, and then we can check that they understood the instructions. And then CCQs are slightly different because they're concept check questions. So we explain a word, and then we just want to know whether they understand it. So an umbrella, I take an umbrella. We're generally in summer. Do I take an umbrella in summer?
Are
And
you
then they will know, no, it's for the rain. That's a concept check question that worked. Although
exactly?
some people take umbrellas for the sun, don't they?
And I think it's often good to give them a question that that they can't just say yes. Do you know what you're doing? Yes.
No.
Okay. These are the wrong instruction checking questions. What we want to do is give them, are we writing or are we speaking? What are we going to have to do in after we get the questions? Okay, these sort of things, so that they can't fake it. Okay, and if they don't know what they're doing, it's not necessarily their fault. It's probably the teacher's fault for not explaining it carefully or in simple language.
But that's why ICQ is coming handy, because then we know whether we need to facilitate more instructions, we need to go over them again. Right, so let's get practical. Things that we can do with students. So let's set our expectations. From the very beginning of the course, I recommend creating a contractual agreement, like a proper contract. The students will create the rules and you can always refer to them. Can you move on, please, Josh?
Sorry.
No worries. So I put them in small groups and they have to agree on two answers for each question. So why do you want to learn English? Generally, they say because my parents want me to. And so that's why I ask for two answers because there's that. But then the second one is always great. It's like, I want to make friends. I want to play video games. I want to travel. Why do you have to speak English in class? I'm not even giving them an option. They have to speak English in class, but they need to understand why. And then they will give you two answers for that. And it will be interesting because they always relate them to something they want to do. And then what does your teacher expect from you? So they can actually, sometimes we take for granted that they know what we expect. Sometimes my students will say, to be a good student. That's not a valid answer. What is to be a good student? Let's be specific. What do I want from you in these class? And then when they're specific, I can draw a contract. What do you expect from your teacher? That's also very important. I've experienced all sorts of answers. Like I want my teacher to smile, for example, to be friendly so that I can speak in class.
I
I
mean,
want my
making
teacher to make it fun to play games. So, you can allocate that for them in return.
Yeah, like any contractor has to work on both sides. So, we expect things from our students, the students would
Absolutely.
expect things from us. Same sort of respect. Yeah.
What is a good student, classmates, and what is respect? So once they've done this, it's kind of tricking them into thinking that they want to do what I want them to do. And they've already written it, they've done it collaboratively, and then we just sign it and always go back to it. When things go wrong, I'll take the contract, I show them, and then do we need to revise this or is this still valid? And they generally own their mistake and say, okay, let's move
And
on.
I mean, they can pull it on you too. If you're not meeting your side,
Totally.
if you're not explaining correctly, if you're not, you know, maybe doing a fun activity when they've been good in class, then they can pull this up and say, hey, teacher, you're not obeying your side.
Great. And what happens when they do what they are supposed to? Let's give them a reward. Let's praise them. Let's tell them, hey guys, you've done great. The contract, fantastic. And what happens when they don't? Are there consequences? You can set them up, and it works fantastically well.
Mm.
Um, with lower level learners, with younger learners, I keep the sheets and then I give them stickers, monthly or every 3 months, every term. I give them a sticker. How well have you done? They grade themselves with the stickers, and then I award them with a sticker as well.
This image comes from our one of our well, all of our task time books. In fact, for the first lessons, we always do these contracts.
Yes.
Okay, and the teachers find them really useful, and I think the students appreciate them too. It sets the tone. It gets you to know what you're going to expect. Okay, and to make sure that they can start on a good footing.
Then encourage and monitor use of English only. So, as we said earlier, let's create a purposeful, meaningful context for them to speak and listen to in English. So, we're going to give you a task and then make it a habit. Don't shift back to the students L1, even if you understand it. Like, okay, now it is English only. Depending on the level, you will allocate more or less time for it. Okay, we always do it, even with low level learners, because they get into the habit. And then I use a timer. I think timers work really, really well. So I create a 2 or 5 minute speak only English time. And I time it. How long can you keep it going for? Have you managed the 2 minutes? Have you managed 1 minute today? Have you managed 5 minutes for higher levels? And then they actually understand their progress too.
A lot of websites you can have that have these timers up there, so you could project that onto the interactive whiteboard or put it on the
Totally.
screen.
And for all year courses, because if you run a very short course, this is different. But for all year courses, create a 10-minute speaking only English time at the same point every day. At the beginning, at the end, let's create it. So let's do it 10 minutes. And then just time it 2 minutes now, 2 minutes for this activity, 5 for this one, 3 for that one. Let's see what your students are capable of.
Angela in the chat says she does that. She just says English time and they start
That's
speaking in English.
It works, doesn't it, Angela? And great to see that you're going to try the contracts. I think I really like that activity. Let us know what happens next time. And then monitoring. As a teacher, you should only facilitate during group work. So put the responsibility on the students. Okay? Set the groups with three. You've got A and B, and they talk, and C monitors that everybody's talking. So then you don't have to be bad cop. You don't have to be police patrol. In the classroom, they do it and they take it in turns. A reward system or a light-hearted punishment. I love those. Okay. A reward system could be okay. So then when we are working on a task later, I'm going to be playing the song that you want to listen to. Okay. Just give me a song. The team that has spoken most English will get to choose a song or will get to choose a game that we will be playing. And then the light-hearted punishments, I think these ones at grades. For example, when a student starts speaking a lot of Italian, for example, in your setting, I will ask them to stand up. And then another one, stand up, stand up. And then at some point, you see that half of the class is standing. And that's when I actually stop it and say, hey, look, this is how much English we're practicing. Remember the contract? Remember why it is important to speak English in class? And then they realize that they have been speaking very little English. Make it a game. What happens when they do what they're supposed to? Again, so they get points. So I just give them points on the board. I keep the points. So you're using really good English, point for this team, for that team, for that team. And then I keep it. I maximize time to use English in class, in tasks, and then is effective and non-intrusive monitoring. This happens a lot. Instead of us reminding them all the time and getting frustrated, English, please, in English, please, we can actually have a point system. So when they see the points, they notice. And then it prevents your frustration because you know repeating the same thing over and over again. And oh, this is a really good one. I think I learned this one from you, Josh. Ask the groups to find an English quote or expression. Whoever uses English the most during the lesson gets to write it on the board. And the others have to learn it and try to use it during or after the lesson. So in the next lesson, okay, so which one was the quote that the best group, the group that spoke most English, wrote on the board? Then you guys are going to have to use it. This is like a light-hearted punishment. And then you can choose a good prize. Do you have any ideas?
Let us know in the chat.
Praise them. That's the best prize, okay? Tell them they're doing a good job. They often only get feedback for correction. And sweets, that's a good one.
Money.
Um, but for example, sometimes we forget because we have this duty of providing feedback, making their English better, help them improve. But when we tell them, hey, well done, you've done great, especially to students who don't usually do it, it reinforces positive behavior. And then let teenagers choose and impress you. Let them play a song in English. Careful with language, no. Or choose a game, as I said earlier. That's kind of the prize we can give them. And then show an appropriate video in English. This is a tricky one because generally the videos they watch, we need to check them first before we show them in public. Now, consequences. What happens when they don't do what they're supposed to? I think this is what I said earlier, to raise students' awareness, just ask them to stand up, and then you will see. And lose accumulative points for their team. If you have all year classes, you can accumulate points, and they do write the points in their notebooks, and they know how well their team is doing. I wouldn't keep the same team for the whole year, but maybe per term or per month. And if you can ask them to sing a short song or dance in class, they will feel a bit ridiculous. Again, you need to make sure that the student is going to feel okay doing this. It depends on the setting and how safe and welcoming environment you've been able to create with these students, because every student is different. But if you can, some of them will find it amusing. And then you can remove privileges. So friends work well together only if they speak English. If you don't speak English, I'm afraid you're not going to be able to work together. And use assessments, reports, or end of course marks. They really want a good report. They want to show their parents they've done a good job. They want marks. And in all year courses, this is
Everyone knows
great.
how easy it is to bring up the end of course, the mark, when they're around that time.
Lastly.
Okay, coming to an end, we always need to remember that good teachers are patient teachers. Speaking in native language is the hardest habit to break out of, but once students do, they'll really realize that they're really on the road to acquiring a second language. You shouldn't expect to go to 100 straight away, okay? But that's always the goal in sight. Okay. Try to involve the weaker students or the more reluctant students into the lesson. Okay. Don't let it be dominated by those students. I mean, there will be students who are happy to speak 100% in English in the English hour. Okay. But, okay, get the other students involved too. Okay. Sometimes it's just the students, they might not even have a higher level. They just have this sort of less shame. Okay. Invite the quieter students, praise them when they contribute. Okay. And promote these sort of meaningful fluency activities. Okay? It really creates a safe environment for students to express themselves. Again, if they get used to this, culture of respect, they not so much pressure for making errors, then they're going to be more willing to take these chances. And learning a language is always taking a risk. Okay. And we can turn, as Ruth was talking about, even monitoring can be student centered. Get the students to monitor each other and call out people who are not speaking English. It's quite common that you can get students go, "Oh, English, please," okay, instead of the teacher always saying that. Okay, can be fun too. Let us know in the chat if you've got ideas for our future webinars. Okay, we've got a few ideas coming up, and we've got a lot of interesting webinars that you can see in the calendar. But let us know if you've got ideas for our future ones. Thanks for your attention. As I said, you will get a certificate of participation. As I said, it might not come out tomorrow or at the weekend, but hopefully you'll get it on Monday or by Monday. Okay, let us know at formazione at mlaworld.com if you don't receive it. Okay, the handout will be there too. Okay, and so you get all this information from this webinar. Okay, join us next week. We're going to have a webinar on expanding vocabulary using TV series. So, really good ideas to bring TV into your classroom. Okay, or at least into the students' learning experience. I hope you join us again. Thanks a lot, Ruth, for your
Thank
presentation.
you. Happy
Happy
Halloween.
Halloween. Everyone's free to go trick-or-treating now. Okay.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.